Good morning. Muy buenos días a todos. Thank you so much for getting up early and being with us this morning. I'm really excited for today's conversation. I'm sorry, I want to default into Spanish right now. I apologize. We are going to discuss how the latest legislative session results might impact the Latino community. Good, not so good. Also, I just want to give you a little commercial. At the end of our conversation, I want to take about 10 minutes so that we can talk a little bit about something that is happening in real time. Governor Abbott has been sending buses of immigrants from the Del Rio, Texas area to DC. They're being dropped off. Some organizations have been very involved in this, Carecen and Catholic Charities. I found out about it at a meeting in Baltimore, that it was actually started so far. Anyway, we'll talk about it at the end. But I just think it'd be important for us to maybe have a brief discussion so that we understand sort of the space we're in right now, right? And what that might mean for us here in Maryland, so we can be—
No, I'm fine.
So let's go back to our—
Thank you, Speedy.
Why we're here, which you know, this past legislative session in Maryland. The state capitol was quite energetic, to say the least, as we entered this post-pandemic phase of COVID, sort of a hybrid situation. Conversations for Latinos, you know, I think we
Coney Nepomuceno from the ARC Baltimore.
Put your mute on.
You know that person, Coney?
Please mute your system. So anyway, our conversations were revolving mostly around health equity, gaining recognition for disproportionate impacts of different issue areas on our communities. We were seeking resources for our organizations and all those organizations supporting these communities, both monetarily wise, but also service wise. And whether it was environmental justice or health equity or education, what really stood out was a generalized need for accurate data, accurate definitions of concepts, ideas, universal language access, cultural competency across agencies, and that funding needed to focus on these issues. So I'm really excited to have my colleagues here with us today. I'm going to heap a bunch of love on them because I think that not only did they actually lead a lot of these battles that we saw for the Latino community, they were so great about pulling us all together, getting us to work in collaboration, keeping us informed. You know, we're all so stretched. So to have, they're like
I want to make you have to listen to this.
My heroes, and help us build coalition for support around these really important issues that are so critical to our community. Honestly, the work they do is incredible. So I just want to raise up their perseverance, their intentionality, and collective approaches. They are truly indefatigable. So lots of applause for all of you. I also wanted to share some background about MLU's efforts, briefly, how we made our decisions related to policy. At the beginning of January, we put together a brief survey to get a sense of what was going on within our membership. We had about 84 respondents, which is a small sample. But the three top issues they said affected the Latino community were healthcare was number one, number two was immigration, and number three is education. And I don't think that surprises any of us. Economic issues came in as well, but they came in kind of a bundle of different areas related from wages to sort of different types of support that are needed, access to capital, et cetera. As relates to the environment, we did kind of a separate little survey. And basically what we saw is that our community links it to healthcare, and we're most concerned about environmental justice issues. And we're going to hear a little bit about what the results were. But I want to also highlight some of the things that they said: mold at home and on the job, air quality, exposure to unhealthy toxins, chemicals, pesticides, et cetera. So with that knowledge, MLU supported a number of bills that addressed families, especially new families. So, and you'll hear this from Kat. Healthy Babies Act was really important to us. After all, more than 30% of our community is under 18, right? We examined language provisions, and we sought to support bills that address accurate data gathering, especially in healthcare. So our speakers today are going to share with us some of the bills that affected our community in large and small ways. like I said, they led these fights. They were in the trenches doing those 3-minute elevator pitches that keep us all informed, you know, and, you know, pushing it, everything to the next level. I think the nuances of their work and strategy of their coalition building, the timing and sequencing are all part of what I hope we get to hear a little bit about today, so that next year we can all be stronger. As in every cycle, there are wins, semi-wins, and losses that might demand a do-over or a radical rethinking. So with that in mind, the discussion will hopefully lay out a big picture roadmap for a way to move forward in preparation for either implementation of the legislation that passed, or alternatively, a strategy to address what wasn't addressed moving forward, because the issues, they just don't go away. So I'm going to invite all my speakers. We have Cathryn Paul, sorry, I call her Cat, from CASA, Ramon Palencia Calvo from CHISPA at the League of Conservation Voters, Maryland, and Frank Patinella from the ACLU. We'll start with you, Cat. Give us a little bit of a sense of those bills that you were so busy and engaged with.
Dr. Lemus, thank you so much. I so appreciate it. And I want to say thank you to you for all the incredible work that you're doing and bringing us all together here. And to everyone on this call for being here. I also want to just recognize Delegate Eversole, who I see, who thank you for everything that you do in the legislature. This session was a really tough one. It was a very insane session. It's a difficult one, being election season, but we were able to get a lot of incredible things done that I feel very proud of. It is just the starting point. When I came and we had this conversation early in session, we talked about our big long-term plan to ensuring that every single person, regardless of immigration status, has access to healthcare. This year, we were able to take the very first step of that. We weren't able to accomplish everything, but the very first step of that, which is passing the Healthy Babies Equity Act. And so the Healthy Babies Equity Act, it is an incredible bill. It provides prenatal care and postpartum care to undocumented pregnant women. This is something that is happening in, I don't know, 16, 17 other states, including places like Virginia, including places like Dr. Lemus, Texas, provides care for, or Medicaid for undocumented pregnant people. And so Maryland was really, really behind on this in particular. And I think behind, quite frankly, in providing care more broadly, right? When we think about children, adults, right, who should have access, right? We believe healthcare is a human right, and everyone should be able to go to the doctor, go to the hospital, you know, get whatever it is treated without fear of deportation, without fear of being transferred to ICE and so on. So this bill is amazing. It will go into effect in July of this year. So any of the folks in the healthcare space who are following this, please definitely reach out to me if CASA is supporting in some of the implementation efforts to make sure everything goes smoothly. So that is really exciting. I do want to also take a moment to highlight Delegate Pena Melnick, who's the sponsor of this bill. I don't think she's on right now, but I just want to, she was not only the sponsor of this bill, but a champion, I mean, just across the board in fighting for our families, we all know, who is now actually the chair of the Health and Government Operations Committee. So if we can just give her a round of applause. I know she's not on here, but I have to mention this because it is such a incredible historic moment in the legislature to have her representing the Latino community, right? And the Afro-Latino community as well, as the chair of this critical committee, right? And I think seeing her rise in power should be a really incredible symbol for not just all of us and the community support that we've been able, the power that we've been able to build in the legislature, but a sign of where the legislature is moving, where she is moving, where the legislature is moving in terms of protecting immigrants, where the legislature is moving in terms of recognizing our Latino families. So I have to mention her. There's one other big win that I want to talk about. And one of the biggest things that I had shared the last time I was here was the housing crisis. The housing crisis has been one of the top issues facing the Latino and the immigrant community. And I always share this at CASA. When we started a hotline during the pandemic, the number one reason people were calling our hotline was their inability to pay rent. That was the number one reason, which, if you can imagine, is not necessarily always the number one reason why people are calling CASA. And to this day, right, more than 2 years since the pandemic has started, that is still the number one reason why people are calling our phones. And so there's a crisis going on. I wanted to highlight, last year we were able to pass the bill to provide legal representation to individuals in eviction court. So we were finally able to secure the funding this session. But not only were we able to secure the funding for legal representation in housing court and eviction court, but we were also able to secure funding for folks in immigration court. We were not able to pass the Access to Counsel Act this session, but we do have that money allocated. So that means our folks who currently do not have a right to counsel are going to start receiving that, counsel. So sort of the unfinished business of dignity, not detention, that we needed to get done. So I feel very proud of that. I want to thank everyone on this call for playing a part. As I'm looking, there are so many of you who wrote testimony, who weighed in on these bills, who called folks, who reached out to people, who really made it possible. So, like I said before, this is only the beginning. I could talk forever. I know I'm getting past my time. But again, I want to say thank you. This is just the beginning. We'll get into what's next in a little bit. So thank you guys again.
Thank you, Kat. So let me hand it over to Ramon now. Let's talk EJ.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation, and thank you, everyone. Again, Ramon Palencia Calvo, Maryland Legal Conservation Voters. So the Maryland Legal Conservation Voters is a statewide nonpartisan organization based in Annapolis, and we use political action and education to protect our environment and communities. And we do this by advocating for smart and effective environmental policies and holding our elected officials accountable for their environmental actions, right? And we publish every year an environmental scorecard, so you can see their score throughout the legislature. And I'm also the director of CHISPA Maryland, which is a key program of Maryland LCV. And we work with Latino communities to ensure that they are engaged in the political process and have a strong voice to protect their environment and health. And we do this through education, promoting long-term community participation and leadership development. And we use the lens of environmental justice and health, focusing on climate change, right? And so this session has, after a couple of years of not having meaningful, big, important environmental wins, I think that this session changed the tone. We know from the latest UN IPCC report that we don't have that many years to act if we want to avoid the most concerning, destructive effects of climate change. So I think that the legislature took action this year. And so we have important victories in the area of climate change and also climate change mitigation and also in environmental justice. And one of the most important wins was the Climate Solutions Now Act. That bill put us out there as a leader in the nation to mitigate climate change. It has a very strong goals, ambitious goals of reducing carbon emissions by 60% by 2031 and net zero by 2045. That is very ambitious. And this bill has strong provisions on some of the areas that produce the vast majority of carbon emissions in Maryland, which are transportation and buildings. But we also have important wins in environmental justice, right? We all know that not all communities suffer the same from climate change and pollution. So it is important for those communities to be part of the process and have a strong say on those decisions that affect their lives, right? So we for many years, we have trying to advance environmental justice. And one key element of this is identifying, defining what are those communities that we just said that are overburdened by pollution and they are underserved by any type of investment and services, right? So one of the big victories this year is that we were able to codify definitions for underserved and overburdened communities. So that is huge for us. So from now on, whenever there's money allocated to mitigate, to be invested in those communities, we can identify them. We don't have that barrier that prevents us from taking action, prevent the state from taking action. So that is very important. An underserved community, is defined by at least 25% of residents qualify as low income, or 50% of residents identify as non-white, and also, or 50% of residents have limited English proficiency. So that is very important to have that definition. And environmental and overburdened communities, we have a number of indicators, and when a community has 3 or more of those indicators, about the 75 percentile qualify as an overburdened community. So that is a huge victory for us for the environmental, to advance environmental justice in Maryland. And another one that I'm very proud of is the electrification of school buses. Remember that electrification, transportation is the sector that produces more carbon emissions in the state of Maryland, about 40%. So for many years, we've been working with community members on finding solutions on the transportation sector. We know that asthma is the leading cause of absenteeism among children. And, Black and brown children suffer disproportionately from asthma. When they're more prone to die from an asthma attack than their white counterparts. So this is very dear and important to us. And, working with promotores and community members, we've been leading the charge on electrification of school buses. And this year we passed a bill that creates a pilot program where school districts, one of the main barriers to adopting this technology is the price of electric school buses. So this bill will cover that incremental cost to bring electric buses to schools. So this is a victory for children, for communities, for school districts. So we are also very proud of that. That is not is rosy and good. We have some struggles and some misses. Some important misses are, the RPS. The RPS is the regulation that increases production on renewable energy every year. And we were poised to clean the RPS, to remove incineration from the RPS, those harmful sources of energy that pollute and benefit from RPS. So unfortunately, we were not able to get that through across the finish line, removing incineration from the RPS. The clean truck rule, let's remember transportation, big source of carbon emissions. Right. The clean truck rule, we signed us onto the California rule, and will periodically increase sales of medium and heavy duty electric trucks in the state. We were not able to get that across the finish line. So we are going to continue working on that. And the Environmental Rights Amendment, right? That will give all Marylanders the right to a healthy environment. And unfortunately, this bill also didn't make it across the finish line. So as we look forward, we have seen tremendous advance this year, but the work is not done. We have a lot to do. And again, and this has been the work of community advocates, champions in the legislature. So we just want to say thank to all of them, and thank to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ramon. I love hearing the word win. Frank, on to you, and all the work that you have been focused on related to education. I don't want to say all because you do so much, but get it rolling.
You better not say all because we'll be here for 2 hours. Okay. More. I'll try to make this relevant and concise. But thank you for the introduction, and also thank you for the work that you do and all the people here attending. Everyone's doing really great work on behalf of the immigrant community and others So just big shout out to everyone. I've been with the ACLU of Maryland for 14 years working on education issues. So I've seen a lot. This is going to be a fight for the long term. We have to be in it every year. Fortunately, we're at the beginning of something exciting called the Blueprint for Maryland's Future. But before I get into that, I want to make sure I give some context to funding issues or just generally how the state approaches funding for education. So back in the mid-90s, going way back, the ACLU filed a lawsuit called Bradford versus the State Board of Education, representing a class of plaintiffs from Baltimore City, parents of Baltimore City students. We represented in this case, and we contended that the state was in violation of its constitutional mandate of providing a thorough and efficient education to Baltimore City students, and that they were grossly underfunding Baltimore City. Of course, the state pushed back at that point, and without getting into all the details, in 2000, the judge ruled in our favor, and the state set up a commission called the Thornton Commission. So that was actually the first iteration of the Kirwan Commission. So the Kirwan Commission is actually following up from the work that started way back when. So the Thornton Commission developed a new funding formula for the whole state. So our work, our lawsuit with Baltimore City being the focus really led to gains that happened statewide for all school districts, for all children in Maryland. The Thornton Commission was put together, appointed by the state, led by Dr. Alvin Thornton, and he and the commission developed a new funding formula for the state, which really prioritized districts of low wealth and really looked at the multipliers in the formula that provides more money for English language learners, for students from low income backgrounds, for special education students. And that was implemented. It called for $1.3 billion. And this was back in 2002 when the Thornton Law was passed. It phased in $1.3 billion from 2002 to 2008. In 2008, it was like, yay, okay, Thornton is funded. But the whole country was undergoing what was called the Great Recession. So all states, including Maryland, were looking for places to cut. And education was one of those places. So they cut a certain component of the formula that allows education funding to increase as inflation hits, right? As the costs of doing business in schools increases. So teacher salaries go up, healthcare premiums go up, cost of materials, keeping the lights on, everything, right? So that inflation index multiplier was zeroed out. So education funding went like that, while costs went like that over the next decade. So we asked the legislature to report to the Kirwan Commission back in 2000, I think it was 2016, 17, and based on fiscal year 2017 dollars, so this is school year 16, 17, we asked what would funding be if you did not cut Thornton funding? And the whole purpose of Thornton funding was to ensure that every school district had adequate funding aligned with the state's constitutional responsibility to meet those constitutional standards. So what was the gap in 2017? It was 1.5 billion. So we were basically back in the same hole we were back in 2002. That meant $503 million for Prince George's County. It meant $342 million for Baltimore City. And those were the two most underfunded districts, but pretty much every district was underfunded. And that was our measuring stick. That was how we could tell, right, where we needed to go. So the short answer on the blueprint funding is we don't know whether or not the funding that is projected to come through the state to districts will cover those gaps originally set back in 2002. And since then, that formula was developed based on standards back in 2002. Now we have Common Core. Now we have other standards, more rigorous standards that we expect children to meet. We don't have a sense of whether or not the funding in the blueprint, $3.8 billion. It's a lot of money when you hear it, of course, and we are thankful and appreciative for it. But we don't know if this is really going to provide all the funding necessary for students to meet the state adopted standards. So I wanted to give you that context first before I get into some of the things that happened this year. So this is really the first year of Blueprint implementation, because when the Blueprint bill passed back in 2020, the governor vetoed it, and then it took a year for the legislature to come back and override that veto. So this year, fiscal 23, is the first year of full implementation, or the phase-in of Blueprint funding. The governor pretty much in his proposed budget funded the formula, except one component called the education effort adjustment. This is $140 million that was left out of the budget, intended for Baltimore City and Prince George's schools. So what do those schools have in common, right? They have the largest population of Black students, and Prince George's County has among the largest, or the largest percentage of English language learners. So to understand the mechanism here, it's important to understand that the state's education funding formula requires both the state and local governments to contribute to their school system. So the formula is wealth equalized, which means that districts of low wealth get more from the state and are required to pay less from their local budget. And it's the opposite for high wealth counties. They get less from the state and have to contribute more locally. So the education effort adjustment is a component of the formula that provides more state dollars to districts of the lowest wealth that have high local funding requirements. Without it, the formula would be completely inequitable. The governor argued that it was optional to fund, but we disagreed, and so did many other advocates. We took action along with Maryland Alliance for Race, Equity, and Education, Maryland Education Coalition, Strong Schools Maryland, and the teacher unions to urge the governor to release a supplemental budget to fund the $140 million that was left out. And it only took a week for the governor to comply. So he caved pretty quickly, and we got that money. So even though we shouldn't have had to expend time and resources fighting for what should have been provided, that was a big win. Mm-hmm. And overall, education funding is trending in the right direction for the coming school year. Understanding the impact of state funding is complicated, with federal pandemic relief dollars starting to go away, but some of that money is still there. A lot of it's expended on one-time expenditures, like air filters and COVID testing and things like that. Mm-hmm. Learning loss. The districts were trying to use the money in a way that they could continue certain services, like hiring tutors and just expanding programming to address learning loss due to the pandemic, keeping those staff on board as the new Blueprint money comes in. So it's complicated to understand and to keep track of. But generally, what we're seeing is public schools statewide will see approximately $456 million more than last year, which is a 6.7 increase. Each school district will have a little more than last year, but it's hard to know how this will impact the classrooms. Money from the Blueprint is earmarked for certain programs, and it will be very important to follow the Blueprint Accountability and Implementation Board. They will be meeting regularly and providing guidance to school districts and reports to the public. We've asked them to make sure information is provided to the public in a way that is easily digestible, so that students and parents can know what to expect to see in their schools, right? What new pre-K and early learning programs can they see? Like Judy Centers will be coming online this year. What schools are getting the concentration of poverty grant for community schools, and what additional services will be at those schools? What does the college and career program look like getting started in these early years? So this is the kind of information that we should expect. The Blueprint bill also calls for $3.8 billion phased in over 10 years. And in previous revenue projections showed that the state could only fund about half of the plan. And given the billions in revenue surplus for this fiscal year, the legislature dedicated $800 million to the Blueprint Fund, ensuring that the plan is funded beyond those first 5 years. It's not quite enough funding to fund the full 10 years, but it's definitely a big step towards that goal. And we applaud the legislature, Delegate Ebersol, whoever else is here listening in. We thank the legislature for that move. Mm-hmm. Also related to education funding is $8 million to provide $500 bonuses to each non-certified education support professional. And there's the Maggie McIntosh arts bill passed that will provide $250,000 to Baltimore City schools for materials and equipment related to implementing art and music programs. on the funding for school building renovation and construction. We've been working on this issue for 2 decades, and it's really been a lack of attention to this issue as to why the school buildings are deteriorating in many areas and just falling apart. But this year, usually we can expect to see 300, maybe close to 400 million every year from the state that goes to districts to rebuild and renovate schools. This year, there's a total of 1.2 billion, which is enormous for all 24 districts. And that's mostly due to the passage of the Build to Learn Act, which will provide 2.2 billion over the next few years, right? So that sounds like an enormous amount, and it is, but school buildings need many billions to address basic health and safety deficiencies and overcrowding.
Environmental standards too.
Yeah, the problem was allowed to fester and deteriorate over several decades. So the state will need to keep this high level of funding to really make progress. I mean, they need to get ahead of the rate of deterioration, which they haven't been doing. So that needs to continue. We weren't able to pass a House Bill 23, the Student Data Discipline Data Bill, which required MSDE to provide discipline data on suspensions and expulsions for every school in the state, disaggregated for race, gender, disability, English language status, and age. We've made a lot of progress over the past decade to ensure that the approach to discipline in schools is less punitive and more supportive by overhauling policies at the state and local levels. And there's a strong movement towards using strategies such as restorative approaches, which seeks to help students with social emotional development and manage behavior and learn how to de-escalate and resolve conflicts. So we're hoping to pass this bill so that the public can see the trends on suspensions and see if the progress is being made at their schools, or if a unfavorable pattern is emerging that requires interventions and new strategies. So hopefully we can double up on our efforts for next session, or perhaps we can just go to MSDE in the interim and see if they'll do it anyway, right? Also worth noting is curriculum bills that we've been working on. These are bills that would have expanded American history to develop content and curriculum standards for African-American history, Latinx history, Asian American, and indigenous history. There's also a bill on multicultural education to develop standards in civic education and social studies. These bills failed. Really, the legislature saying that they would be overreaching their role and stepping on the toes of MSDE and local school districts on developing curriculum. But we're going to be meeting in the interim with allies. Encourage anyone on this call who wants to join any of these efforts to reach out to me, and I'll provide my my email, because this is, this is something that has been just ignored, right? But we know that communities have been calling for this kind of change for a long time, right? Schools that are inclusive, that center their lived experiences, their history, because that provides a sense of belonging, right? And otherwise, they're outliers, right? Okay, I'll stop there.
Thank you. All three of you have given us much, much, much to think about, and you've all come at it from such different perspectives. But there's clearly certain unifying factors, a common story, our common narrative as we, all evolve in Maryland, right? Needs, resources, definitions. Again, those are important. So, okay, you've discussed wins, semi-wins, losses. What do you think were your biggest wins? And not necessarily legislatively, but maybe a change in attitude, culture, a moment of clarity, maybe something that really disappointed you, and our coalitions. What does that mean for all of us as we strategize moving forward? Anybody want to take a shot? Definitely. Oh, you're shy.
Definitely. I can start us off. I mean, I already mentioned one, I think, of the biggest wins, which is seeing Chair Peña Melnick move into this position as the first Latino chair in the history of the General Assembly. I do want to say, attached to this win, which really is a win for all of us, is there's still only 4 people. Of course, there's associate members. There's still only 4 core members of the Latino caucus in the General Assembly. We have got to do the work to make sure that there is representation across the entire legislature. And as much as we absolutely love our folks who are representing us right now, the reality is that is not representative of how many Latinos and immigrants, period, right, are actually representative of Maryland. So that's sort of a little bit more of where we have to go. But I think another victory, though, has been the level of engagement this session, and really sort of stemmed from last session as well. And I hope, and I'm gonna mention this because I hope this is something we can all get on top of. But folks were able to participate virtually. We had more testimony written on these core priority immigration related bills than sort of ever before. I mean, like hundreds of people wrote in written testimony. That is not always the case, right? We packed hearing rooms, which was incredible. So for those who were in person for some of those, what we do is we fill the hearing room to put a lot of pressure on our legislators, right, to do the right thing. We had people who were outside of the State House every single day. Those last few weeks of session, every single morning from 9 to 10 to greet legislators, there were actual people in person talking about the Healthy Babies Act, talking about climate change, talking about education. And that presence in Annapolis is something that that continues to grow, that I think we should be very proud of. We still need to continue to build greater engagement, but that is absolutely a win. And I think that reflecting on that and figuring out ways we can continue to build on that is super critical.
Awesome. Anybody else?
You know, I think, you know, in the, do you want to go first, Ramon? Okay. In this kind of new age of equity, you know, race equity, inclusion, and kind of it's mainstream, right, to use those terms. And I think a lot of us have been working to make sure that those terms are used in the right way and not to push, you know, some kind of really watered down, you know, bill on whatever issue, you know, and they'll characterize it as equitable, but you know, I think there is a lot of attention though being paid and on this matter, and I'm definitely seeing the effects of, you know, all of our collective action and campaigns on equity on whatever the issue is. I mean, I think the Senate president, was it last year or the year before, are producing new fiscal notes, right, on race impact or impact on race on certain or criminal justice bills, I think. I'd like to see that done for all the bills that are passed, right? But that's a step in the right direction. That's new. I'm seeing, you know, more state officials and lawmakers partner and follow the lead of advocates, which is also a positive step in the right direction. You know, the $2.2 billion Built to Learn Act, the school construction bill that I mentioned earlier, that's modeled exactly and structured exactly the way that we modeled the 21st century school building program. This is the $1 billion school construction program that we passed in 2013. And I want to give a shout out to Neil Bergsman because yeah, there he is. He was with the Maryland Center for Economic Policy, and I think it was a subsidiary of something of nonprofit. So that was your first stint, I think, there, right, Neil? And we contracted with Neil because he was the budget wonk, right? And he really helped us develop this financing strategy, which now is leading to, like, you know, $2.2 billion in investment that's going statewide, right? So the state has picked up on something the advocates had done, right? And saying, this is how we need to change. That's how I take it, at least. And that's that's great, right? Business as normal, as usual, just is not going to work, right? We have to think of new and innovative ways, and government needs to step out of their comfort zone and think about innovative ways to get things done. A couple other things, the curriculum bills on multicultural education and expanded history are new. This is the second year that I've seen these proposed, and there's more and more advocates and support behind these bills every year. So I'm hopeful that we're going in the right direction there. Something that you're working with us on, Dr. Lemus, the ELL work group. So this already happened in 2020, where the Blueprint bill established what's called the Blueprint Work Group on English Language Learners. And their task is to pull all the data on English language learners throughout the state. You know, where are the programs, where are the ESOLs, where are the gaps in the programs, and what's needed, what are new and innovative policies to help improve education for English language learners going forward at the beginning, right, of the implementation of this Blueprint bill and throughout. So this is an exciting opportunity. And me, Dr. Lemus, a number of folks, CASA is involved as well. We formed a group called the Community Work Group on English Language Learners to work on a parallel track as the Blueprint Work Group on English Language Learners. And I'd say we've made a pretty big impact so far. We sent a letter to MSDE last fall saying, you guys are meeting and you're not streaming your meetings. We don't see any announcements of the meetings. They're not public. We don't see any materials, what you're discussing. We want you to make this transparent. So they started streaming their meetings immediately. They made a website with all the meeting materials and videos posted. So that was the first step. And then we went back and said, hey, we want a meeting with you. We want to see authentic engagement with community partners, right? You need to speak to impacted people on the ground to understand what's going on, right? And they need to help shape what happens in this group, because that group is going to be releasing a report at the end of the year, December, and that's going to affect things for the next decade or more. So we need our primary goal is that report needs to have everything in it to ensure that education for policies proposed for English language learners are comprehensive, inclusive, far-reaching, culturally responsive, all of that, right? And we presented to MSDE a couple weeks ago with Dr. Lemus and others here. And we're about to have a listening session, a statewide listening session with with MSDE as partners. So Mr. Chowdhury is going to be there. So this is great. We have a superintendent that's willing to engage and partner. We hope this event's going to be huge, and we're going to get a lot of people statewide, ELL students and their parents, families, advocates, teachers there to get their feedback so MSDE can be more informed. So that's the work we're doing. They're open to it. That's a positive change.
Let's give Ramon a chance.
Sorry.
It's okay. You got a lot to say.
Thank you. I want to echo some of what my colleagues said. You know, one of the important bills that didn't make it across the finish line, although some elements of the bill did, it was Justice 40. The Biden administration came out with Justice 40, Executive Order Justice 40, where, you know, it commits 40% of climate and energy funds to be at least 40% spent on overburdened and underserved communities affected by climate change. There was a bill in Maryland to codify that language. However, although the definitions made it across the finish line, that investment, specifically in communities that needed the most, didn't make it across the finish line. Some of the language got into several parts of the climate solutions now and budget, but still, it's something critical that we need to make it, to make sure that we fight for that. And also, I think it's very important, you know, we saw this year more environmental justice voices in Annapolis. We saw more advocacy. However, you know, in the previous phase of putting those bills together that address climate justice, environmental justice, we did not see community voices working closely with legislators and putting those bills together. That bottom-up approach that really produces bills that address the problems in our community, in Latino communities. So we need to change that status quo, I guess it is, that, yeah, whatever is the word. We need to fight more for that. You know, another thing that we saw this year is the newly created Maryland Environmental Justice Coalition, which is the table of the Mid-Atlantic Environmental Justice Coalition, bring together community voices to fight for environmental justice, turn some of the problems that they have in their communities into legislation and then legislative victories. I think that is something that I see that growing and probably bringing more and more community members together, really voicing their priorities, opinions, and working together. So I think that is very important. And let's remember what Cathryn said. This year is an election year. Everybody's up for re-election. So we really need to pay attention to that. We need more representation at all levels of the government, local, state, legislature, statewide. So I think that is very, very, very important. And finally, another thing I want to mention, it's, you know, we also got to pay more attention to the intersectionality of the environment and look for those opportunities while working in specific issues. How can we address environmental injustices? How can we advance environmental justice in Maryland? You know, if we're talking about housing and we're fighting for affordable housing, let's make sure that we also work at the same time on environmental justice issues that affect our housing, all housing stock, you know, exposure to mold, exposure to lead, and so on and so forth. And when we are talking about transportation, let's make sure that we also address the injustices that face low income and underserved, low wealth and underserved communities. So that intersectionality, I think, is very, very important. And one more point, you know, when engaging legislators, I think that the voices that are affected by those environmental injustices have to lead the way, not professional advocates leading the way. So creating those opportunities, working with community organizations, BIPOC-led organizations, working with them, creating those opportunities for community members to really have that front and center space that they need, that they have to talk to our representatives.
Thank you. I also think we have, let's see, Delegate Ebersole. I hope I didn't mispronounce your name, sir.
Thanks, you didn't. And I'll be brief, and I really will. When people say it's often a red flag, but they're not going to be, but I will. I serve on the Ways and Means Committee, and I'm the chair of the Early Childhood Subcommittee. And I want to point out that one of the big victories this year was a tremendous amount of attention to childcare, keeping child cares active, but also we had a really unique bill that was put in by Delegate Solomon, which I helped shepherd through, which begins to establish, doesn't establish it yet, what we call presumptive eligibility for the scholarship program. A lot of times people come to child care and they want to apply for the scholarship, but the paperwork is extensive and the amount of time it takes for somebody to do it, and then for MSDE to vet it can be up to a month. And they really can't assume they have child care at that time. Oftentimes what happens is they get mired in the process and don't finish it. And so we really didn't get this passed straight up, but we're going to have a study done on this. And we want to have it happen where if somebody shows up to get childcare and they think they're eligible for the scholarship, they can in fact begin. We will assume they have that. They will sign an affidavit saying, I think I'm eligible. They'll give us what they think their salary is so we can get an idea of how much of the scholarship they deserve. And we would start them with the risk that if they don't qualify, we would assume that cost for that month. It's not that much, but it would get people who need childcare in the program and help them through it. And I think that this impacts this community significantly, language barriers being what they are. Also, we believe that if we get them into childcare, they'll want them there. They probably will help coach them through the process of completing the application, making sure that they stay and making sure that they are eligible. We did a number of other things, and we all know that childcare is incredibly important. The kind of jobs that people in lower socioeconomic standing in a lot of this community finds themselves there. Really, childcare is sort of the backbone of allowing them to work. And so the speaker put forth a package, and I helped shepherd it through. So for me, it was a big victory because it felt great. And I said I'd be brief, and I'm done. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Delegate. I was going to say, just to follow up on your point about the importance of childcare, we know that in the Latino community, Latinas in particular, have not been able to go back to work. So this kind of bill can be very, very helpful to ensuring that their kiddos have safe place to be, and they have the resources to access. So I did say at the beginning that I wanted to talk a little bit about something that's going on in our immediate area, in the DMV area. We have, this week I was notified in Baltimore at a meeting that they're starting to see in some organizations the incoming groups of immigrants who need temporary housing, transitional housing. And it stemmed from Governor Abbott has begun to send buses to DC. In those buses have folks who have been processed they've gone through the process at the adjudication center, and they are being allowed in as asylees. They are landing in DC. The buses are not like packed with thousands and thousands of people. We're talking like 15 people at a time. But so far we've received 10 buses, or at least as of Tuesday morning. There may have been 2 more that came in yesterday. I'm not sure of all the details. And I'm just learning about this, but I wanted to take this opportunity to share it with you because, we're going to get impacted. So better prepared, right? Better to be forewarned. What we know so far is that about most of them, about 80% of them, end up getting picked up by family members, or they already have a way and a means to go on to the next phase of their trip because they're all being connected to their family members. Many of them are going further up north to New York, et cetera. Some are going down to Florida. Demographically, what I was informed was that many of them are from Nicaragua, Venezuela, and Cuba. And many are from Angola and Congo as well. So they are arriving, they don't have food, they don't have clothing, they don't even have a welcome center or a place to land. They're literally being dropped off in the streets. Catholic Charities and Carecen have really done yeoman's work in taking it on so far, but they can't do it alone. So I just want to put it out there. I don't know if any of you want to say anything or comment about it or share your thoughts. Kat, you had said at the beginning you might have something conceptually to share with us. Maybe you could help me out here.
Yeah, I mean, I think the situation that's happening is so dehumanizing. And to see the governor just say, I'm just going to drop you off like an item somewhere else.
Yeah.
I think we all recognize that, but I think what it reminds me of is just how not there we are. And I feel like there is still this, I mean, maybe not in our political spaces, but there's still this like excitement and agreement that things are better now, that Trump is no longer in office. And that is simply not the case. There are still tons and tons of folks who are being displaced. This is one example, right? But we also see like planes leaving every single day, folks who are being deported. The deportations have not stopped. That is right. That is period. The deportations have not stopped. And we have so much work to do. Regarding the buses, CASA has been tracking the situation. I think at this stage, we're very focused on welcoming these individuals. And I think it's important that any of us that have the ability to make statements, to be broad, to speak out, to make sure that folks feel welcome here. There are a lot of folks who are in DC fighting against their arrival, right? Who are saying, send them back to Texas. deport them, do whatever the case might be. It's just not safe. And so our focus is right now is on welcoming them. I'm going to put some information in the chat shortly. There is a network of organizations that you mentioned, Dr. Lemus. There's a network of organizations who are working on responding to this. So I'm going to put in a link to donate. A link there's a direct sort of Venmo link that will go directly to those families. If you guys can help us circulate that and get that around as much as you can. There's also a link to buy actual materials. So if folks are able to contribute in that way or help distribute that information through your networks, that would be greatly appreciated.
That's a really good idea. I see a couple of questions. I have a question here related to the Haitian population. I do not have numbers on anything, actually, to be honest. This is literally all from phone calls, the information that I do have. I do not know what the status is on the Haitian groups that are along the border. I also see that there is a Kat, you put in the, there's a Venmo at Sanctuary DMV with Text Solidarity. Okay. So one thing to bear in mind, what CASA and Catholic Charities are doing, there's about 50, so I said 80% get picked up by families or have resources to move on to their final destination. There's about 15% estimated who want to move on, have places to go, but do not have resources. So CASA and Catholic Charities are also gathering funds and literally buying plane tickets, bus tickets, train tickets, et cetera, for these folks. The other point is, and this is what concerns me, is there's about 5% apparently who don't know what to do. Now we're talking about 900 buses here that are being, Governor Abbott is estimating he's going to send our way. So if 5% of that, I worked out the math, if it's 900 buses, 15 people, I'm not the best at mathematics, but it's something like 13,500 people. Most of them are moving on, 5% stay. It means like 1,000 people more or less would remain behind. That's a very, very, uneducated estimate. But let's assume 1,000 people stay behind. The DC is not prepared for all this kind of space. You brought it up, Kath, there's no housing. There's no housing. There's little transitional housing, and so many folks are in need of transitional housing right now because of the housing crunch. So there's a lot to think about. We would like to just put it out there to all of you because we know you care. And maybe there is some way to continue to gather resources and information, but we'd like to keep you all informed. And also anything, please feel free to share with us. And we'll keep tracking and doing what we can and collaborating with all of you because that's what we do. I put my email in the chat in case you want to reach me. I just want to put it out there. I feel deeply for what's going on. I started my work long time ago as a border scholar. I have traveled every port of entry, literally along the US-Mexico border. I can tell you that the Del Rio port of entry is very depressed area. The center where they process these immigrants are, it's not big, but that is the primary job for that area, for those folks there, and they don't have the resources either to help them out. So it's a problem for them. It's a problem for us. But, I always say, juntos podemos más. Together we can do more. So we're at the end of our time. It's 10 a.m. We done good. Thank you so much for everything, for being with us. Delegate, I so appreciate having you here and sharing all that good news about the kiddos. This is awesome. We look forward to having you again. And next month, I was just saying when we first started the presentation this morning, we'll probably end up talking about this Texas bus situation and giving you an update and we'll hopefully be a little more organized. So things are free flowing. moving quick. Thank you all for everything you do. I look forward to continue working with you. You are my coalition partners, my speakers. They keep me informed and keep me working. So thank you so much. Have a great day, and you know, feel free to reach out. Thank you.